So welcome back to the Change Tempo Insight series. Today I meet with James Cronk. He's the Managing Director of Retail and Consumer Goods at BT Global. And James is going to share with us his insight about how the volatile environment is both changing and challenging the business, and also how, by creating a clear vision or a line of sight, he's enabling increased confidence for his leadership team as well as the customer. So welcome, James. I know it's an extremely busy time right now, and I appreciate having this opportunity for you to join us. So why don't you make a start and say a few words about who you are and what you do?
Hi there. Hi. I'm responsible for probably the top 70% or so of the global 100 CPG organizations, which BT are very fortunate to be in a position of actually running most of their platforms when it comes to networking, unified communications, security, voice type of applications. And so we sit very much behind the whole sort of digital framework, which most organizations are having to very rapidly think about how this new world is starting to impact them. So yeah, we're in a fortunate position. We've got a lot of really good clients under our belt.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks. So James, say a little bit about how the last 3 months has impacted you and what you do.
Well, I think certainly for us, obviously, both as an internal perspective for BT, we're a very virtualized organization anyway.
Right.
And so I think certainly speaking on behalf of my particular teams, we're a very mobile organization. Obviously, we look after large global organizations, so we have to have that practical mindset of being able to be anywhere, anytime for any customer. And as part of that, obviously, utilizing technology has always been, a mainstay of the way that we operate. And so obviously, without actually being physically having to be mobile, we are obviously embracing what we do. So we're drinking our own champagne in many respects in terms of having that much more sort of virtualized open communication, both within our own teams, but also externally. So I think to an extent, it's not been a shock to us to suddenly be working from home, utilizing networking, utilizing unified communications, because we do it as part of our DNA. Right. So we've obviously had to adapt in other ways because we're not jumping on aeroplanes every other week or so. But
thank goodness.
There are some advantages, yes.
Yes. So for BT, it absolutely sounds like it's something that you've been doing a long time anyway, but many of your customers haven't. What have you applied that has helped your clients adjust to these challenges of going virtual and the volatility that it presents for them, I guess?
Yeah, that is. I think this is obviously the critical instance is a lot of these organizations, and in particular, I think in our specific vertical, a lot of these organizations are manufacturers as well as distribution and retail. And so suddenly having to put thousands of employees into a much more virtualized work from home state, that's been a huge impact for them. And from our perspective, obviously being able to deploy the technology is one thing, but secondly is obviously getting users to be able to adapt as well as adopt the technology to the point that they don't really see or realize any real change in the way that they operate on a day-to-day basis. They've got to be able to really encompass everything that it has to offer and not miss a beat in terms of their own business process. And so that's been probably the biggest challenge for them as well as us in terms of helping them on that journey very quickly on that journey.
Yeah, very quickly. So that's the key word there, isn't it? Because it just happened almost overnight.
Some. I mean, we were given a matter of days, if not weeks, as in 2 to 3 weeks maximum, to take in some instances, up to 120,000 employees out of one particular organization into a totally work from home virtualized state, and that was done pretty much within about 8 days.
Nice. What values do you think BT really leveraged at this point, to make that happen? Most people are aware of BT. What values and guiding principles do you think really came to the fore here to make that happen?
I think the one thing about BT is obviously, this type of movement, this type of requirement from an outside world perspective in terms of what what I mentioned, the adoption side of things,
Yeah.
is very much within the DNA of BT. We understand, and if anything, we run a lot of this level of capability, the technology capability. So for us, the value is the know-how, the experience, and obviously working with so many organizations, both domestically as well as globally. It's just having that understanding and experience of what's good, what's bad, and how to get through, certain, some of the gates to make sure that it's a very successful implementation.
Right.
So, you can't put a price on that level of experience.
No. And so it's interesting that, during this time of volatility, it's about, as a business, holding on to that reputation or continuing to develop that reputation, because at times like this, your customer is going to go to those that they feel most confident in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really in this world now, especially when you're coming to manage large global operations, there are very few organizations who have that level of credibility and capability to do this adequately.
Okay. So with navigating this chaos and the change, you're leading a global organization, so it's huge responsibility and it has a huge impact. What are you holding true for your team and for your clients to keep them engaged?
That's a big question. I think in terms of the team aspects, the one thing I think we do quite well, and I probably realized to a greater extent, is to over-communicate. Because obviously, we've had instances of people who are, holed up in small apartments in Milan, all the way through to, totally the opposite. And so, having an appreciation that everybody is in a very different environment themselves, whether they are alone or whether they've got a family around them, you've got to have that overall sort of sensitivity to them as individuals as to how they are going to adopt and adapt to this new working world. And so it's not a carte blanche. And so, certainly from my perspective, it's just been able to embrace what we're doing and bring that virtualization into something which is a much more personal environment. So everybody has become a lot more approachable because it's a click of a button. And whereas before, where people are out the whole time, much more difficult to get hold of people. Now you can actually almost see what they're doing, where they're doing it, and why they're doing it. And so being able to really ensure that they have that more personalized approach through communication is being very, certainly for me, top of mind.
Nice. Okay, excellent. So I know we talked a little bit before this discussion that you're learning all the time about the virtualization of the virtualization of BT, fully, and the virtualization of customers, but also in terms of running the business. There's a paradox, isn't there, about how much contact employees can have with customers and how effective that is virtually versus face-to-face.
Yeah, and I think that's probably for any business, not just us. I think that's probably been one of the biggest learning curves that we're going through, because you can never replace a level of, personalized individual, in the same room. You can't replace that from a relationship standpoint, and that will never go away.
No.
But I think what I think we've realized potentially through some of the experiences some of the customers have had as well is that actually utilizing what we're doing at the moment in a way that it really is much more embedded into your day-to-day process can be a much more efficient way to get things done, because there isn't a huge amount of time wastage, and it can be done effectively if you've got everybody understanding what that process is.
Yeah.
And so, my thinking is that going forward, I bet a lot of organizations are really going to look at, future requirements from a travel perspective and say, you know what, those 2-hour meetings when I flew into Munich or whatever, do I need to do that? Probably not.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is going to be held on a much more sort of virtualized basis, because everybody suddenly is having to embrace using video conferencing a lot more, and it works. It now works. 10 years ago maybe it didn't work to the level of what we're seeing at the moment. So I think the realization is I can now do that without having to waste a whole day for a 2-hour meeting.
Yeah.
I think those days are going to be changed very, very dramatically. However, going back to my team side of things, I've got teams dotted around the globe where I will never replace having that much more personal sort of interaction with them, where it does count. You need to have that meaningful, that liaison with them. And, for me, being with them at the customer site, etc., I won't replace that, because there are elements of that where that level of quality is irreplaceable when it comes to using video.
There's something about being with somebody in the same room that's it's difficult to describe, but there's just an extra element, isn't there, when you're actually with people that you just can't replicate.
It is. I mean, just the normal sort of social things, body language, all that sort of stuff. You can't get it. You can't get everything utilizing that.
Just from here on.
No, absolutely. But also, I think humans, you've got to have that personal sort of relationship side of things, which you can only build from being physically in the same environment together.
Yeah.
So, I think, once you've got that whole sort of premise in place, what you do in between, going back to my point about the 2-hour meetings in Munich, etc., that's easy to do, so long as you've got that level of interlock in the first place.
Excellent. So there's it's about keeping accessible, keeping yourself connected, over communicating and over connecting with people, just to make sure, because you want to keep that more so than before, keeping that connection going. What other things have you done with your leadership teams and with their teams that have helped them feel connected? What sort of interventions or activities or actions?
Informal sessions. Sessions, not just assume everything is going to be done on a sort of meeting by meeting basis. The one thing I think you've got to be very careful of is almost, becoming too intense in this sort of environments. I mean, it is intense, let's face it.
Yeah.
And, going back to my point earlier where, you've got probably on the whole more access to individuals at all different levels, whether it's the senior levels or not. But, and so there's this automatic assumption that, well, I know this particular individual obviously is not going to be going anywhere, so I can pinpoint them at any one point in time, and therefore, I'm having meetings from 7:30 in the morning all the way through to 7:30 at night. And I know a lot of people, and I'm sure everybody who's watching this will appreciate this. And so that's massively intense, and I don't think it's overly productive either. In fact, I know it's not overly productive from a personal perspective. And so you need to have that switch off time. And so I've sort of I think I learned quite earlier in this whole sort of crisis that we've been going through, just from some testimonials from individuals in my team, that actually almost enforcing that switch off by putting a couple of hours a week for virtual coffee mornings and all that sort of stuff. And I just sort of said, okay, we're going to do this, and these are the set times over the week. And everybody's going to turn up if they want to. It's not mandatory, but if they want to just have that switch off time, we're not going to be talking about anything to do with the business or work. This is all purely social. And I think, and I hope, it sort of has had a positive impact, because there was that let off a bit of steam. Just relax a little bit. Get away from that Groundhog Day type of attitude.
I was describing to somebody my roller coaster journey when I first went virtual, mainly virtual, working 5-6 years ago. And it was great at first, and then you finally find yourself slipping into that, getting on the computer at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, not getting off away from the desk or away from the computer till 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And then you experience this burnout. And then you have to really take control. And so I think there's that sort of, this is fun, this isn't fun. You know, I'm working
Yeah,
far too hard and I'm just not managed to get away. And then you try and find that
yeah,
equilibrium where you
yeah.
can give the brain a rest, because you can't be creative, you can't be resilient, you can't
No, you
be,
can't. No, you can't.
if you're 100% intense on being at your desk. And
But
it can
this
get
is
very unhealthy.
but I think it's the prerequisite is around having that level of self-discipline, because
Yeah, yeah.
you know, myself and an awful lot of my colleagues who have been always used to the travel aspect. This is a novelty. You know, I've never spent 3 months at home before, never in my career. And as much as my family are probably bored of me being around, you know, it's quite nice for me to be able to start, you know, structuring a day around actually, you know, having a lot more quality time at home as well. So this does get into play, this whole sort of work-life balance,
Yeah.
literally is now at the forefront of most people's minds. And so I think it just comes down to a bit of self-discipline and not thinking that just because, you know, your laptop is, you know, 10 yards away, I should be utilizing that laptop to be in a work mode throughout the whole time because I can. It's being able to literally get to a point where you shut it and walk away and leave it. And that takes a level of self-discipline as well. There's a number of people I speak to on a regular basis that will say, well, I sort of feel guilty, you know, at 10:30 if I go off and do something, you know, and why? You need to switch off. You know, if you're in a physical work environment, people do naturally have more switch off because they get into conversations with people which might not be work related.
Exactly.
Yeah,
When you were face to face, you'd go off and get a coffee or go for a walk or go and see
exactly.
somebody, or
Yeah,
it's exactly the same thing.
yeah,
Excellent,
yeah.
excellent. So just to sort of think about, you know, wrapping this up, is there anything else that you might see as being sort of ongoing potential volatility, you know, over the next 6 months? Because I think it's going to continue, but
Yeah.
I'm curious what you see might be the ongoing challenges as we come out of lockdown.
I think probably it will continue. You know, not to the extent that we're seeing maybe today, but you know, I think going back to my earlier point, I think there's an awful lot of organisations or employees of organisations who are starting to realise the fact that actually there is a different world available to doing things as efficiently, if not more effectively, without having to spend so much time commuting or traveling, etc., etc. So, you know, that's obviously going to displace a lot of things which potentially were the traditional model. Now, pain points, I think the pain points are going to be more, you know, an awful lot of organizations, I think, are beginning to look at, well, hold on a minute, you know, if I've got 4,000 people based in London, you know, in these very expensive offices, you know,
Real
what does that
estate,
mean?
yes.
What does that mean to me?
Gosh.
You know, therefore, you know, and I know a lot of people have been discussing this. You know, it's a topical thing for most organizations. Is you know, well, do I need to have 50% of that employee base actually physically located? Probably not. And so, therefore, implications are more of the pain points about what do we do with the real estate, or the challenge, or the opportunity as to what you do with the real estate. You know, the expense of it, etc., etc. But you know, I do feel that this should all be part and parcel of this whole sort of you know, this digital evolution that we're all going through. You know, most modern organizations now are putting an awful lot more emphasis on digital enablement for the employee, whether that's physically in the office or virtually. And actually, from my perspective, the two should be fully integrated.
Yes.
100%. It's all about the employee or the user experience. And therefore, that's what I would like to do, or we would like to do as an organization, to translate that to how we see our customers starting to embrace the technology as well, because it should all be fundamentally is an end-to-end journey.
Yeah, excellent. So finally then, what are your top 3 leadership lessons from the last 3 or 4 months?
Well, definitely not assume everybody's in the same pot. So this whole element of being very sensitive to people's individual requirements, 100%, which led me into sort of that whole communication and access point, you know, for me, as well as other people within the organization, is to have that level of accessibility. You know, and actually just to make sure that you're checking in a lot on the personal side of things. Just to, you know, literally straightforward question: how are you? Literally, how are you taking this? How are you faring in the circumstances? So I think there's been a lot more sort of view in terms of people's well-being, 100%. So, and not taking anything for granted.
Yeah. Wow. Absolutely.
Mm.
Well, on that very poignant point, thank you very much, James. I appreciate you sharing all that wonderful insight with us and your wisdom around leading at global level, and sharing your insights. So thank you again. Appreciate
Pleasure.
it.
Yeah, pleasure. Good to talk to you, Amanda.
You too. Take care now.
All the best.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, let's just do a quick roundup of some of the key elements or insights that James had shared with us. Certainly from a leadership lessons perspective, really having that empathy with understanding that everybody is in a different place, in a different environment, whether they be alone or with the family. Sensitivity to each individual as they adapt and adopt to the new world. And checking in with people on a regular basis, not taking anything for granted. I think that was a big ending point for James that was quite a powerful sentiment that he shared with us. In terms of value to customers, really being available. BT made themselves available to his customers at any point, as well as being, going through massive change themselves. They were also, making sure that they're available to their customers, building on the reputation for virtualization and to support the customers through that journey, and leveraging those advantages of technology, but also dealing with some of the disadvantages and problems that can cause. Actions to navigate change is to over-communicate, personalize the approach, have informal sessions that are purely social activities rather than business, coffee mornings and so on. Manage intensity of working from home. He spent a lot of time talking about this. It seemed as though it was very important that they needed to minimize that constant meetings as being unproductive or counterproductive. Encouraging breaks and time out as much as possible, giving the brain a rest, giving it time to settle down and think and consolidate all that information. And in terms of future challenges, the need for face-to-face, James doesn't believe will ever go away. There's going to be some critical meetings or situations with employees whereby he said that, we're going to have to, I want to be there with them side by side. Travel needs will decline as virtualization becomes more efficient also. But the real estate, I think companies are going to have some big decisions to make about what they do with the real estate that they have and the buildings. Is it an opportunity or is it a challenge? And then finally, the digital evolution in the office and virtually, ensuring that user experience and the employee experience is continued to be improved, that we don't just stop here. Well, I wish James all the very best in the future, and thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Cheers.